You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The first camera I found was in the shower head. The second was nestled in the eye of a teddy bear. By the time I discovered the third, hidden behind a vent in the master bedroom, I knew I was in serious trouble. It was supposed to be an easy night of babysitting. The Wilsons were new to the neighborhood, having just moved into the sprawling Victorian mansion at the end of our street. When Mrs. Wilson approached me after church last Sunday, her perfectly manicured nails tapping my shoulder, I jumped at the chance to make some extra cash. "We'll only be gone for a few hours," she had said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Tommy's an angel. He'll be in bed by 8, and you'll have the run of the house." Now, as I stood in the center of their opulent living room, my heart pounding against my ribs, I realized just how wrong I'd been to trust that smile. The house was silent, save for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tommy had gone to bed without a fuss, just as his mother promised. It was only after I'd settled onto the plush leather couch, ready to dive into my homework, that I noticed something odd about the antique mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A tiny red light blinked in the corner of the ornate frame, almost imperceptible. Curiosity piqued. I approached it, my reflection growing larger with each step. That's when I saw it. A lens no bigger than a pinhead embedded in the glass. My blood ran cold. A camera. Someone was watching me. Panic set in as I began to search the room, my eyes darting from one shadowy corner to the next. The more I looked, the more I found. A camera in the bookshelf, another in the light fixture, one even hidden in the potted plant by the window. My mind raced. Were the Wilsons secretly filming me? Or was someone else watching? Someone who had invaded their home just as they had invited me in? I sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my socks slipping on the polished wood. I had to check on Tommy. His room was dark, illuminated only by the soft glow of a nightlight. I crept to his bed, relief washing over me as I saw his small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. But as I turned to leave, my eye caught something on his dresser. The teddy bear sat innocently among his other stuffed animals, its glassy eyes reflecting the dim light. But one eye was different. It glinted unnaturally, and as I leaned in closer, my suspicions were confirmed. Another camera. My stomach churned. I had to get out of here, had to call the police. But as I reached for my phone, I realized with horror that I'd left it downstairs on the coffee table. I descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the old wood sending shivers down my spine. The house felt different now, sinister. Every shadow seemed to hide another lens, another eye watching my every move. As I entered the living room, my gaze immediately fell on my phone. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead, it sat in the center of the coffee table, screen up, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. I snatched it up, my trembling fingers fumbling with the passcode. No signal. Of course, the Wilsons' house was notorious for its poor reception. I'd have to use their landline. I made my way to the kitchen, where I'd seen a phone mounted on the wall earlier. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The phone was gone, leaving behind only an empty bracket and a few frayed wires. My heart hammered in my chest. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. Someone was in the house with me, moving things, cutting off my means of communication. I was trapped. I ran to the front door, yanking on the handle. Locked. I hadn't locked it earlier. I was sure of it. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried the windows, each one secured tightly. A noise from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaking across the floorboards. They were coming from Tommy's room. I had to get to him. Camera or no camera, I couldn't leave that little boy alone with whoever was up there. I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel, its weight reassuring in my grip, and began to climb the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, the old wood groaning beneath my feet. The footsteps above had stopped, but I could hear something else now. A low murmur, like someone talking softly. I reached the landing, pressing myself against the wall. Tommy's door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. I inched closer, straining to hear. "That's right, Tommy. You're doing so well, just like we practiced." The voice was unfamiliar, deep and soothing. My blood turned to ice. What were they doing to him? I peered through the crack in the door, and the scene before me made my heart stop. Tommy sat cross-legged on his bed, eyes wide and unfocused. In front of him stood a man I'd never seen before, tall and lean, dressed all in black. But it was the object in his hands that made my breath catch in my throat. A tablet. On its screen, I could see multiple video feeds, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway where I now stood. He was watching everything. I must have made a sound, a gasp, or a whimper, because the man's head snapped towards the door. Our eyes met through the narrow opening, and for a moment, time stood still. Then he smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile, full of malice and triumph. "Ah," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Our guest of honor has arrived. Won't you join us?" I didn't think. I ran, down the stairs, through the living room, my feet barely touching the ground. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps thundering, gaining on me with every second. The back door. It was my last hope. I skidded into the kitchen, my socks sliding on the tile, and lunged for the handle. It turned. Thank God. It turned. I burst into the backyard, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through my socks as I sprinted across the lawn. The high fence loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I reached it, my fingers scrabbling at the rough wood as I tried to pull myself up. Behind me, I heard the back door slam open. He was out of the house. "You can't run forever," he called, his voice calm and confident. "This is my game, and I know every move." I hauled myself over the fence, landing hard on the other side. I was in the neighbor's yard now, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I ran through unfamiliar gardens, vaulting over low fences and ducking under clotheslines. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed on. I had to get help. Had to save Tommy. The streets of the neighborhood blurred past me as I ran, houses dark and silent. Why wasn't anyone awake? Why weren't there any cars? It wasn't until I reached the end of the street that I realized something was terribly wrong. The road simply ended. Beyond it was nothing but an empty blackness, as if the world itself had been cut off. I turned, desperate, looking for another way out. But everywhere I looked, I saw the same thing. Darkness encroaching, swallowing up the edges of the neighborhood. And in the distance, growing louder with each passing second, I heard his footsteps. "You see now, don't you?" His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. There's no escape. There never was. I sank to my knees, the damp grass soaking through my jeans. As the darkness closed in around me, I saw him emerge from between two houses, that terrible smile still plastered on his face. "Don't worry," he said, kneeling down beside me. "You're going to be a star." The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the blinking red light of a camera, recording every moment of my defeat. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart racing. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. It had been a dream. Just a terrible, vivid dream. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, desperate to ground myself in reality. As the screen lit up, a notification caught my eye. A new email, sent just moments ago. With trembling fingers, I opened it. There was no message, just an attachment, a video file. As I hit play, my blood ran cold. There I was, running through an endless neighborhood, terror etched on my face. And behind me, always behind me, was him. The camera blinked, its red light a silent witness to my newfound nightmare. The first snap of the twig could have been a deer, the second, maybe a raccoon, but the third, followed by hushed voices, told me I wasn't alone in these godforsaken woods, and whatever I'd stumbled upon, I wasn't meant to find. I'd set out at dawn, my backpack laden with enough supplies for a 3-day hike through the Adirondacks. The trail was supposed to be easy, a well-marked path that even novice hikers could navigate. But somewhere around noon, I'd taken a wrong turn. Or maybe the turn I'd taken was right, and the map was wrong. Either way, I found myself in a part of the forest that felt older, wilder than where I'd started. The trees here grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to create a canopy so thick that only slivers of sunlight managed to penetrate. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As the hours wore on and the light began to fade, I realized I was well and truly lost. I should have stopped then, should have made camp and waited for daylight. But panic had started to set in, driving me forward in the desperate hope that I'd stumble upon a ranger station or a road, anything that could lead me back to civilization. It was in this state of near exhaustion and mounting fear that I first saw the flicker of light through the trees. A campfire, I thought, relief washing over me. Other hikers, maybe, or a park ranger, someone who could help me find my way back. I pushed through a dense thicket, branches scratching at my face and arms, and emerged into a small clearing. What I saw there made me freeze, my heart leaping into my throat. It wasn't a campsite, at least not any kind I'd ever seen. A large, military-style tent dominated the center of the clearing. Around it, crates were stacked haphazardly, their contents hidden, but their purpose clear. This was no casual camping trip. This was an operation. I should have left then, should have turned and ran as fast and as far as I could. But curiosity, that damned human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I crept closer, my feet moving of their own accord. The tent flap was partially open, and I could see movement inside. Shadows danced on the canvas, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. I strained to hear what they were saying, but the words were indistinct, muffled by the rustle of leaves and the pounding of my own heart. I was so focused on the tent that I almost missed the other details. The fresh tire tracks leading into the clearing, too wide for any ATV. The sophisticated-looking equipment scattered around, decidedly not standard camping gear. And there, half hidden under a tarp, something that made my blood run cold. Guns, not hunting rifles, but serious, military-grade weapons. I'd stumbled onto something big, something illegal. My mind raced with possibilities. Drug runners, arms dealers, whatever it was, I knew I was in way over my head. I started to back away, trying to retrace my steps without making a sound. But in my haste, I forgot to look where I was going. My foot came down on a fallen branch, and the crack echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The voices in the tent stopped abruptly. I heard the scrape of a chair, footsteps approaching. Panic seized me, and I dove behind the nearest tree, pressing myself against the rough bark. "Check the perimeter," a gruff voice commanded. "Could be an animal, but I'm not taking any chances." I heard them fan out, their footsteps crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I tried to control my breathing, to make myself as small and quiet as possible. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. They had flashlights. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they wouldn't come my way. "Nothing over here, boss," a voice called out, too close for comfort. "Keep looking," the gruff voice responded. "If it's a ranger, we need to know." I opened my eyes a crack, trying to gauge how many of them there were. Through the gloom, I could make out at least 3 figures moving through the trees, maybe more back at the camp. Too many for me to outrun or overpower. I needed a plan. I couldn't stay here forever, and sooner or later they'd find me. I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The forest seemed to close in around me, every direction looking equally dark and foreboding. That's when I saw it. A small gap between 2 large boulders, half hidden by a fallen log. It was a tight squeeze. but it might just be big enough for me to slip through. And if I was lucky, it might lead to a way out. I waited until the nearest searcher had his back turned, then made my move. Crouching low, I scurried across the open ground, my heart in my mouth. Just as I reached the boulders, I heard a shout. "Hey, over there!" I didn't look back. I dove for the gap, ignoring the sharp rocks that scraped my sides. It was a tighter fit than I'd thought, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I was stuck. But with a final, desperate wriggle, I slipped through. I found myself in a narrow ravine, the walls rising steep and high on either side. Without pausing to catch my breath, I started to run, stumbling over loose rocks and exposed roots. Behind me, I could hear shouting and the beam of flashlights. They knew where I'd gone, and they were coming after me. The ravine twisted and turned, and I followed it blindly, praying it wouldn't lead to a dead end. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't dare slow down. The sounds of pursuit seemed to be getting closer. Or was that just my imagination, fueled by fear and exhaustion? Just when I thought I couldn't go on any further, the ravine opened up. I burst out onto a wider trail, clearly man-made, a hiking trail. In the distance, I could see lights, a ranger station, or maybe a campground. Safety. I ran towards the lights, my feet pounding on the packed earth. Behind me, I heard frustrated shouts echoing from the ravine. They'd lost my trail. As I neared the lights, I saw it was indeed a ranger station. A lone figure stood outside, peering into the darkness at the sound of my approach. "Help!" I gasped, stumbling the last few yards. "Please, you have to help me." The ranger, a middle-aged woman with a kind face, and caught me as I nearly collapsed. "Easy there," she said, her voice calm but alert. "What's happened? Are you hurt?" Between gasping breaths, I tried to explain what I'd seen, the camp, the weapons, the men chasing me. The ranger's expression grew grave as she listened. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding me towards the station. "I need to call this in." As we entered the warm, brightly lit building, I felt the adrenaline start to fade, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. The ranger sat me down, handed me a bottle of water, and went to make her call. I sipped the water slowly, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real, but the scratches on my arms, the mud on my clothes, and the lingering fear in my gut told me otherwise. The ranger returned, her face serious. "I've alerted the authorities," she said. "They're sending a team out now, but it'll take them some time to get here. In the meantime, I need you to tell me everything you saw, every detail, no matter how small." I nodded, taking a deep breath. As I began to recount my story, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever I'd stumbled upon out there in the woods, it was bigger than me, bigger than this small ranger station in the middle of nowhere. And as the night wore on, with the ranger taking notes and the clock ticking towards dawn, I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in the wilderness again. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, now held shadows I couldn't unsee. But as I finished my tale and saw the determination in the ranger's eyes, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever was out there, whatever dark operation I'd uncovered, it wouldn't remain hidden for long. And maybe, just maybe, my ill-fated hike would lead to something good after all. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the windows, I heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Help was coming, and with it, the promise of answers to the mysteries hidden in the depths of the forest. The lock clicked shut with a finality that made my skin crawl. I yanked at the door handle, once, twice, 3 times, but it wouldn't budge. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were trapped, and whoever had locked us in was still out there. It was supposed to be a quick overnight stay, just a place to rest our heads before continuing our cross-country road trip. Sarah and I had been driving for hours, our eyes heavy with exhaustion, when we spotted the neon vacancy sign of the Pine Grove Motel flickering in the darkness. The place looked like it had seen better days, paint peeling from the wooden siding and weeds pushing up through cracks in the parking lot. But it was cheap, and we were too tired to care about aesthetics. The night clerk, a wiry man with thinning hair and nicotine-stained fingers, barely looked up from his dog-eared paperback as he handed us the key to room 13. "Checkout's at 11, he mumbled, his voice as worn as the motel itself. Our room was small and musty, with faded floral wallpaper and a sagging queen-sized bed, but it had a shower with hot water and clean towels, which felt like luxury after hours on the road. "It's just for one night," Sarah said, trying to sound optimistic as she tested the lumpy mattress. "We'll be back on the road before we know it." If only we'd known then how wrong she was. The trouble started around 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by a sound I couldn't quite place, a scraping, metallic noise that seemed to be coming from just outside our door. At first, I thought I was dreaming, the remnants of a nightmare clinging to my consciousness. But then I heard it again, louder this time, followed by hushed voices. I nudged Sarah awake, pressing a finger to my lips to keep her quiet. She blinked at me in confusion, then froze as the noises outside grew more distinct. Someone was definitely out there, and they were trying to get in. We scrambled out of bed, our hearts pounding in unison. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, ready to call for help, but my stomach dropped when I saw the no service geared message glaring back at me. "Try the landline," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I picked up the ancient-looking phone on the bedside table and put it to my ear. Nothing, not even a dial tone. We were cut off. The scraping at the door intensified, punctuated by muffled curses. Whoever was out there was getting frustrated. I looked around frantically for something, anything we could use as a weapon. The lamp was too unwieldy, the TV bolted to the wall. My eyes landed on the shower curtain rod. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I had just managed to wrench it free when we heard a new sound, the unmistakable click of a key in the lock. Our eyes met in the dim light, a silent understanding passing between us. This was it. We had to be ready. The door swung open, and two figures stepped into the room. In the darkness, I could make out the glint of something metallic in one of their hands, a crowbar, or maybe a tire iron. Without thinking, I swung the curtain rod as hard as I could. There was a satisfying thunk as it connected with something solid, followed by a grunt of pain. Sarah screamed, more out of surprise than fear, I think, and lunged for the open door. I was right behind her, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the walkway as we ran. The night air was crisp and biting, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of our room. We sprinted across the parking lot, the gravel digging into our souls, heading for our car. Safety was just a few yards away, but as we reached the vehicle, my heart sank. The tires were flat, all four of them slashed open. We were going nowhere. "The office?" Sarah gasped, already turning towards the flickering neon sign at the far end of the lot. "Maybe the clerk can help." We ran, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. I chanced to glance over my shoulder and saw three men now, their faces hidden in shadow but their intent clear in the purposeful way they moved. We burst into the office, the bell over the door jingling cheerfully, incongruous with our panic. The night clerk looked up, startled, his paperback falling to the floor. "Hey, please," I panted. "You have to help us. There are men chasing us. They broke into our room." But as I spoke, I saw the clerk's expression change, not to one of concern or alarm, but to something else, something that made my blood run cold. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. Now, he said, his voice no longer bored but sharp with anticipation. "What seems to be the problem here?" The door behind us opened, the cheerful bell now sounding like a death knell. I turned to see our pursuers filing in, blocking our exit. In the harsh fluorescent light of the office, I could finally see their faces clearly. One of them, the largest, sported a fresh bruise on his temple where I'd struck him with the curtain rod. "Looks like we've got some runners, boys," the clerk said, coming out from behind the counter. He was holding something in his hand, a syringe filled with clear liquid. "You know how I hate it when they run." Sarah gripped my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "What do you want from us?" she demanded, her voice stronger than I would have thought possible given the circumstances. The clerk chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Want? Oh, sweetheart, it's not about what we want. It's about what others are willing to pay for. And let me tell you, pretty young things like you two, you'll fetch a very nice price indeed." The reality of our situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a robbery. This was something far worse. We were merchandise to these men, nothing more than product to be sold to the highest bidder. I felt Sarah tense beside me, and I knew without looking what she was about to do. In that moment, we were perfectly in sync, our thoughts aligned by sheer desperation. We moved as one, charging towards the nearest man. The element of surprise was on our side, and we managed to knock him off balance. Sarah's elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs, while I aimed a kick at his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he went down with a howl of pain. We were through the door before the others could react, the cool night air hitting us like a slap to the face. But where could we go? Our car was useless, and we were in the middle of nowhere. "The woods," Sarah gasped, already veering towards the tree line that bordered the motel property. "We can lose them in there." I didn't argue, just followed her lead as we plunged into the darkness of the forest. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the beam of flashlights cutting through the night. They were coming after us, and they knew these woods far better than we did. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces and underbrush tearing at our legs. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system. Were they gaining on us? How long could we keep this up? Just when I thought my lungs would burst, Sarah pulled me to a stop. "Listen," she whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. At first, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. But then I heard it, the distant rumble of traffic, a highway, civilization, hope. We pushed on, our pace slowing to a jog as exhaustion began to take its toll. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but we couldn't be sure if that meant we'd lost them, or if they were just being more cautious in their search. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, we broke through the tree line. There, stretching out before us like a ribbon of salvation, was a 2-lane highway, and in the distance, I could see the headlights of an approaching truck. We waved our arms frantically, probably looking like madmen to the driver, but thankfully, mercifully, the truck began to slow. As we climbed into the cab, the kind-faced trucker peering at us with concern, I felt the first real sense of relief since this nightmare began. We were safe. We had escaped. But as the truck pulled away, carrying us towards the nearest town and the promise of help, I couldn't shake the memory of the clerk's words. How many others had fallen victim to their scheme? How long had they been operating, turning their remote motel into a hunting ground for unsuspecting travelers? I looked at Sarah, saw the same resolve in her eyes that I felt in my heart. This wasn't over. We had escaped, yes, but now we had a responsibility. To report what had happened, to make sure those men were stopped. Our road trip had taken an unexpected detour, but as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I realized our journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The moment I handed him my keys, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. His fingers closed around them, a triumphant glint in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. But by then, it was too late. We were already driving down a road I didn't recognize, and the man I thought was just an interested buyer had become something far more sinister. It had started innocently enough. I needed to sell my old Honda Civic to help cover this semester's tuition. As a broke college student, every dollar counted, and I figured I could get a decent price for it. I posted an ad online, included some decent photos, and waited. When Mike reached out, he seemed perfect. He asked all the right questions about the car's history and maintenance. He was polite in his messages, and when we spoke on the phone, he had a friendly, easygoing manner that put me at ease. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near campus for him to see the car and maybe take it for a test drive. I remember thinking how normal he looked when I first saw him. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a polo shirt and jeans. He could have been anyone's dad or friendly neighbor. We chatted over coffee, and he seemed genuinely interested in my studies. Looking back, I should have noticed how he steered the conversation, asking about my family, where I was from, whether I had roommates, but at the time it just felt like pleasant small talk. When we got to the car, he did a thorough inspection, looking under the hood and checking the tires. Everything seemed to be going well. "Mind if we take it for a spin?" he asked, flashing a smile. "I'd like to see how it handles on the highway." I nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. It wasn't until we'd been driving for about 15 minutes that I realized we were heading out of town. Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even as unease began to creep in. Mike's smile didn't waver, but something in his eyes changed. "I know a great stretch of road to really test the engine. Won't take long." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "Actually, I'd rather we head back now. I have a class in an hour." He didn't respond, just kept driving. The buildings grew sparser, replaced by open fields and patches of woodland. My heart began to race as I realized how isolated we were becoming. "Mike, seriously, turn around, now." I tried to make my voice firm, authoritative, but it came out shaky. That's when he dropped the act. His friendly demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Shut up and sit still if you know what's good for you." Fear gripped me, icy tendrils wrapping around my heart. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in real life, did they? But the growing distance between us and civilization told me this was all too real. I glanced at the door, wondering if I could jump out. But we were going too fast, and even if I survived the fall, where would I go? There was nothing but empty fields for miles. "Don't even think about it," Mike growled, as if reading my mind. "One wrong move and things will get very unpleasant for you." I believed him. The menace in his voice left no room for doubt. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. My phone was in my pocket, but I knew I'd never be able to call for help without him noticing. Maybe if I could just send a quick text. Slowly, trying not to draw attention, I slipped my hand into my pocket, but before I could even touch my phone, Mike's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in a vice-like grip. "Nice try," he snarled, wrenching my arm so hard I cried out in pain. "Hand it over, now." With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and placed it in his outstretched hand. He immediately rolled down the window and tossed it out, the device disappearing into the blur of the passing landscape. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I was truly cut off now, with no way to call for help. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't fall apart now. I had to stay alert, look for any opportunity to escape. We drove for what felt like hours, the scenery unchanging. Mike remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I tried to memorize every turn, every landmark, but it was useless. Everything looked the same. Finally, we turned onto a dirt road, barely more than a trail cutting through a dense patch of woods. The car bounced and jolted over the uneven ground, the branches scraping against the windows. After a few minutes, we emerged into a clearing where a dilapidated cabin stood. Mike put the car in park and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "We're here. Get out." My legs felt like jelly as I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. In any other circumstance, it might have been peaceful. Now, it felt oppressive, isolating. Inside, Mike ordered, prodding me forward with something hard pressed against my back. I didn't need to look to know it was a gun. The cabin was as run down inside as it looked from the outside. A layer of dust covered everything, and the musty smell of long abandonment filled my nostrils. There was a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and an old mattress in the corner. Nothing else. "Sit," Mike said, gesturing to one of the chairs. As I sank into it, he pulled out a length of rope from a duffel bag I hadn't noticed before. My stomach churned as he began to tie my hands behind my back, the rough fibers biting into my skin. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. Mike paused in his work, considering me for a moment. "It's nothing personal, kid. Just business. You'd be surprised how much people will pay for a young, healthy specimen like yourself." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. The horror stories I'd heard on the news suddenly became my reality. I felt sick. "Please," I begged, unable to keep the desperation from my voice. "You don't have to do this. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just let me go." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that made me flinch. "Save your breath. You're not the first to make that promise, and you won't be the last. You're merchandise now, nothing more." With my hands secured, he moved to tie my ankles to the chair legs. I knew this might be my last chance. Gathering every ounce of strength and courage I had left, I waited until he was kneeling in front of me. Then, with all my might, I kicked out, my foot connecting solidly with his face. Mike fell backward with a cry of pain and surprise. I didn't waste a second. I threw myself sideways, the chair toppling over with me. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through my shoulder, but I ignored it, focusing on wriggling my hands free. I heard Mike cursing, scrambling to his feet. The ropes were looser than I'd thought. He must have been overconfident, not expecting me to fight back. With a final, desperate tug, my hands came free. I untangled myself from the fallen chair just as Mike lunged for me. I rolled away, narrowly avoiding his grasp. My eyes darted around the cabin, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. There, the window. It was small, but so was I. I sprinted for it, adrenaline giving me speed I didn't know I possessed. Behind me, I heard Mike's enraged roar, felt his fingers brush my shirt as he tried to grab me, but I was faster. I threw myself at the window, arms covering my face as the glass shattered around me. Pain lanced through me as shards cut into my skin, but I didn't stop. I hit the ground running, bolting for the cover of the trees. Mike's shouts echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. But I kept going, driven by pure survival instinct. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that green maze. But eventually, the shouts faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest. Still, I didn't slow down. I couldn't risk it. It was nearly dark when I finally broke through the tree line and found myself on a road. A real, paved road. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I started walking, my feet aching, my body screaming for rest. But I couldn't stop. Not yet. Headlights appeared in the distance, were growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying it wasn't Mike, praying they would stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance past the cuts and bruises. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. "No," I choked out. "I need help, please." As they ushered me into their car, promising to take me to the police, the reality of what I'd escaped began to sink in. I was alive. I was free. But I knew the nightmare wasn't over. Mike was still out there, and who knew how many others like him. As we drove towards safety, I made a silent vow. I would do whatever it took to make sure he was caught, to make sure no one else would fall victim to his scheme. My ordeal might be over, but my fight was just beginning. The first drop of blood on the kitchen floor should have been my cue to run. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as the old man's kindly smile twisted into something far more sinister. In that moment, I realized I hadn't found shelter from the storm. I'd walked straight into the lion's den. It had started as a simple road trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup. Just me and the open road. I'd been driving for hours, the rain pelting my windshield with increasing fury, when my old Chevy started making a noise that sent chills down my spine. A rattling, sputtering sound that spelled trouble. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last town I'd passed through, when the car finally gave up the ghost. It shuddered once, twice, and then died completely, leaving me stranded on a lonely stretch of country road. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum on the roof, weighing my options. My cell phone showed no signal, of course, and I hadn't seen another car for at least an hour. With a sigh, I pulled on my raincoat and stepped out into the downpour. That's when I saw it, a faint light in the distance, barely visible through the sheets of rain. A farmhouse, set back from the road. My salvation. I slogged through the mud, my shoes squelching with every step. As I got closer, I could make out more details. The house was old, its white paint peeling in places, but it looked well maintained. Flower pots lined the porch, and warm light spilled from the windows. I hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps. It was late, past 11 p.m. according to my watch. Would they even be awake? But desperation won out over politeness, and I climbed the steps, raising my hand to knock. Before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. An elderly man stood there, his face creased with smile lines, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice as warm as his smile. "Looks like you got caught in quite a storm. Come in, come in." Relief washed over me as I stepped inside, out of the rain. The house was cozy, filled with the kind of knickknacks and worn furniture that spoke of a long, well-lived life. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, but he waved off my apologies. "Nonsense. We can't have you standing out there in this weather. I'm Frank, and that's my wife, Martha," he said, gesturing to an equally elderly woman who had appeared in the doorway to what I assumed was the kitchen. "I'm Alex," I replied, still dripping on their welcome mat. "My car broke down about a mile back. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for a tow." Martha clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Oh dear, that's no good. But I'm afraid our phone line's been down since this afternoon. The storm, you know." My heart sank. "Oh, I see." "Now, don't you worry," Frank said, patting my shoulder. "You're welcome to stay here tonight. The storm should pass by morning, and we can figure things out then. Martha, why don't you get our guests some dry clothes while I make some tea?" Before I knew it, I was seated at their kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed robe that smelled faintly of mothballs, my hands curled around a steaming mug of tea. Martha fussed over me, insisting I eat something while Frank regaled me with stories of the farm's history. It was nice, comforting. For the first time since my breakup, I felt cared for. But as the night wore on, little things started to nag at me. The way Martha's smile seemed to falter when she thought I wasn't looking. The fact that Frank's eyes never quite met mine when he spoke. And there was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't until I got up to use the bathroom that I noticed it. A faint, coppery smell underlying the homey sense of baked goods and furniture polish. I tried to shrug it off, but it clung to the back of my throat, making me uneasy. When I returned to the kitchen, Frank was alone, washing dishes at the sink. "Martha's gone to prepare the guest room for you," he said over his shoulder. I nodded, moving to pick up my mug from the table. That's when I saw it. A single drop of red on the faded linoleum floor. I stared at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Frank must have sensed my stillness. He turned, his eyes following my gaze to the floor. For a moment, Neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he put down the dish he was holding and turned to face me fully. "Ah," he said, his voice no longer warm and grandfatherly. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice that." I looked up at him, my heart beginning to race. The kindly old man was gone, replaced by someone else. Someone whose eyes were cold and calculating. "What's going on?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Frank sighed, reaching for something behind him. "It's nothing personal, you understand. It's just, well, Martha and I, we have certain needs, and it's not often we get visitors out here." He brought his hand into view, and my blood ran cold. He was holding a large kitchen knife, its blade gleaming in the overhead light. I backed away, my eyes darting around for an escape route. "You don't have to do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll leave right now. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Frank chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, I'm afraid it's far too late for that, Alex. You see, we've already decided. You're going to help us, whether you want to or not." I made a break for it then, running for the front door. But Frank was surprisingly spry for his age. He caught me before I could reach the handle, his bony fingers digging into my arm with surprising strength. "Martha," he called out, "our guest is trying to leave." I heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Martha appeared, holding something in her hand, a syringe, I realized with growing horror. Now, she said, her voice sickly sweet. "There's no need for all this fuss, just a little prick, and you'll feel much better." I fought then, with everything I had. I kicked and scratched and screamed, but they were stronger than they looked. Frank held me down while Martha approached with the syringe. In my desperation, I lashed out blindly. My elbow connected with something soft. Martha's stomach, I realized, and she stumbled back with a cry of pain. The syringe clattered to the floor. Taking advantage of Frank's momentary distraction, I wrenched myself free. I ran for the kitchen, my mind racing. The back door. There had to be a back door. I found it, fumbling with the lock as I heard Frank's angry shouts behind me. The door finally gave way, and I burst out into the rain-soaked night. The yard was muddy, my bare feet slipping and sliding as I ran. I could hear them behind me, their voices carried on the wind. I headed for the barn, thinking I could hide there, maybe find a weapon. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet night. Inside, it was pitch black. I felt my way forward, my hands outstretched, praying I wouldn't run into anything. Suddenly, my foot hit something solid. I went down hard, landing in something wet and sticky. The coppery smell from earlier hit me full force, and I had to choke back a scream as I realized what it was. Blood. So much blood. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness now, and I could make out shapes. Hanging hooks, tables with straps, and something else. Something that looked horribly like body parts. This wasn't just murder. This was butchery. I scrambled to my feet, bile rising in my throat. I had to get out of here. Had to run. Had to find help. But as I turned to leave, I found the doorway blocked. Frank and Martha stood there, silhouetted against the night sky. "Oh, Alex," Martha said, her voice filled with false sympathy. "You really shouldn't have come in here. Now we have no choice." I backed away, my eyes darting around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My hand closed around something cold and metal, a pitchfork leaning against the wall. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing it in front of me. Frank laughed, a chilling sound. "Or what? You'll kill us. Go ahead. It won't be the first time someone's tried." They advanced slowly, confidently. They knew they had me cornered, but they had underestimated my will to survive. As they got closer, I made my move. I charged forward, the pitchfork held out in front of me like a lance. Frank's eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late. The tines sank into his chest with a sickening thud. Martha screamed, a sound of pure rage and grief. She came at me with her bare hands, her nails raking across my face. We grappled, rolling on the blood-soaked floor of the barn. My hand closed around something hard, a hammer that had fallen from a workbench. I swung blindly, feeling it connect with a dull thud. Martha went limp. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, the reality of what had just happened washing over me. Then, slowly, I got to my feet. The rain had stopped, I realized, and in the distance, I could hear a sound that made my heart leap. Sirens. As I stumbled out of the barn, I saw police cars pulling up to the farmhouse, their lights painting the night in red and blue. Someone must have heard the commotion, called for help. I sank to my knees in the muddy yard, relief and shock washing over me in equal measure. It was over. I was safe. But as the police swarmed around me, asking questions I couldn't begin to answer, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. The things I'd seen in that barn, the horrors I'd experienced, they would stay with me forever. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The safe wasn't supposed to be open. That was my first clue that this seemingly cushy house-sitting gig was about to turn into a nightmare. As I stared at the stack of unmarked bills and the suspicious-looking ledger, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front door lock. In that moment, I knew I was in way over my head. It had all started innocently enough. I was a broke college student, desperate for some extra cash to cover my textbooks and maybe splurge on something other than ramen noodles for once. When my professor, Dr. Winters, I mentioned he and his wife needed someone to house-sit for a week while they were at a conference, I jumped at the chance. The Winters lived in one of those big, fancy houses in the suburbs, the kind with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. It was a far cry from my cramped studio apartment. When I arrived, Mrs. Winters gave me a whirlwind tour, pointing out the plants that needed watering and the elaborate security system I needed to set each night. "Oh, and dear," she'd said, pausing at the door to the study, "this room is strictly off limits. Private papers and all that. I'm sure you understand." I'd nodded, not thinking much of it. Rich people and their secrets, right? The first few days were uneventful. I lounged by the pool, raided their well-stocked fridge, and binge-watched shows on their massive TV. It was like a vacation in paradise. But on the 4th day, curiosity got the better of me. I'd always been a bit nosy. It's what made me want to be a journalist in the first place. The locked study door had been nagging at me, and I couldn't resist taking a peek. I told myself I was just making sure everything was okay in there. Maybe there was a plant I'd forgotten to water. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was enough to convince me to try the door handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. The study was immaculate, all dark wood and leather-bound books. It looked like something out of a movie, but what caught my eye was the painting on the far wall. It was slightly askew, and behind it, I could see the edge of a safe. Now, I'm not proud of what I did next, but like I said, curiosity has always been my weakness. I approached the painting, my heart pounding. I told myself I was just going to look, not touch anything. But when I moved the painting aside, I froze. The safe was open, just a crack, but enough for me to see inside. That's when I heard the front door. Panic set in. I quickly closed the safe and straightened the painting, my hands shaking. Footsteps echoed through the house, getting closer. "Hello?" a male voice called out. It wasn't Dr. Winters. I looked around frantically, searching for a place to hide. The closet was too obvious, and I'd never make it out the window in time. In desperation, I dove under the massive oak desk, pulling the chair in close to conceal me. The study door opened, and a pair of expensive-looking shoes came into view. "All clear in here," the man said, presumably into a phone. "Yeah, safe's untouched. Looks like the kid didn't snoop after all." Kid? Were they talking about me? Another set of footsteps entered the room. "Good," a woman's voice replied. "Last thing we need is some nosy college brat messing up our operation." My blood ran cold. Operation. What had I stumbled into? Let's get what we need and get out, the man said. The Winters will be back tomorrow, and we need to have everything in place by then. I held my breath as they moved around the room. I heard the safe open, papers rustling, and the distinct sound of money being counted. Perfect, the woman said. With this last shipment, we'll have enough to expand into 3 more states. The boss will be pleased. Shipment. States. My mind was reeling. This sounded big, way bigger than some run-of-the-mill theft or fraud. What about the girl? The man asked. Think she suspects anything? There was a pause. Doubtful, the woman finally replied. From what the Winters said, she's just some naive student. Probably spent the whole week by the pool. If only they knew. They continued to talk, mentioning names and places I didn't recognize. I tried to memorize as much as I could, my journalistic instincts kicking in despite my fear. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they finally left the study. I waited, barely breathing, until I heard the front door close and a car engine start up outside. Slowly, I crawled out from under the desk, my legs cramped and shaky. My mind was racing. What should I do? Call the police? But what if the Winters were involved? They could be back any minute, and I had no proof of what I'd heard. I needed evidence. With trembling hands, I approached the safe again. It was still slightly open. Inside, I found stacks of cash, the ledger I'd seen earlier, and a USB drive. Without thinking too much about the consequences, I grabbed the USB drive and shoved it in my pocket. I also snapped a quick photo of the open safe with my phone, making sure to capture the cash and ledger. Just as I was closing the safe and straightening the painting, I heard another car pull up outside. Panic gripped me again. I raced out of the study, barely remembering to close the door behind me. I made it to the living room just as the front door opened. Dr. and Mrs. Winters walked in, looking tired but happy. "Oh, Emma," Mrs. Winters exclaimed. "We didn't expect you to still be here. How was everything?" I forced a smile, hoping my face didn't betray the turmoil inside me. "Great," I managed to say. "No problems at all. How was your conference?" As they chatted about their trip, I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. "Well, we won't keep you," Dr. Winters said finally. "I'm sure you're eager to get back to your own place. Here's a little something extra for your trouble." He handed me an envelope. I thanked him, feeling sick to my stomach. Was this hush money? Did they know I'd overheard something? I gathered my things and headed for the door, my legs feeling like jelly. "Oh, and Emma," Mrs. Winters called after me. "We might need a house sitter again next month. Would you be interested?" I turned, meeting her gaze. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was something in her eyes, a calculating look that I hadn't noticed before. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Just let me know." As I drove home, my mind was in chaos. What had I gotten myself into? I had evidence of something. But what exactly? And what was I supposed to do with it? I thought about going to the police, but without knowing who was involved, it felt too risky. What if the corruption went higher than I could imagine? When I got back to my apartment, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I powered up my laptop with shaking hands and inserted the USB drive. What I found made my blood run cold. Financial records, shipping manifests, names and addresses. It was all there. This wasn't just some small-time operation. This was organized crime on a massive scale. And my professors, the kindly Dr. and Mrs. Winters, were right in the middle of it. I stayed up all night, poring over the files, taking notes, trying to make sense of it all. By morning, I had a decision to make. I could turn over what I knew to the authorities and hope for the best. I could pretend I'd never seen anything and try to forget it all. Or I could dig deeper, use my journalistic skills to uncover the whole story. As the sun rose, casting a pale light through my curtains, I made my choice. I couldn't walk away from this. It was too big, too important. I opened my laptop and began to type. The suburbs hide dark secrets behind their perfectly manicured lawns and friendly smiles. But sometimes, all it takes is one curious house sitter to bring those secrets into the light. I didn't know where this story would lead me, or how dangerous it might become, but I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. The cushy house-sitting gig had turned into the biggest story of my life, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost.